Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session titled Class of 2021 and COVID-19 Knowns and Unknowns. My name is Melanie Reed. I am extremely proud to be the Director of College Advising at Seattle Academy and represent today my awesome team, Dave, Misa, Mike, Stacy, and Taylor. I am also thrilled to work with the excellent people on this panel, whom I will have introduce themselves in just a moment. I also want to acknowledge the shared work and friendships of the Seattle Independent Schools group. We like each other, we communicate a lot, we help each other, and today is an example of getting creative and enterprising, which is something that we all tend to do. So thanks again to SAIS group, to Courtney from Bush for organizing, and to our facilitator from StriveScan, Julie. Because we have a limited amount of time, I'll do a little housekeeping and then I'll turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves in just a sec. And then I'll probably kick it off with a couple questions. In terms of housekeeping, this is being recorded. So if your student, your partner, your best friend could not make it today, please let them know that StriveScan will release this information. The schools will also have access to it. So we will be sure to get you not only this session, but the other 8 sessions today on a ton of interesting topics. You also know from your extensive Zoom life that there is a Q&A option at the bottom of the screen. So if at any point you feel moved to put a question in the Q&A, I will be monitoring those questions. I encourage you to do this, so please put questions in the Q&A. This is a really fabulous group of friends. They are a valuable and fun group of presenters, and so they are, I know, eager to answer your questions. So give us questions to answer, and I will also choose from them perhaps the most representative ones. So to start out, I would love my friends and colleagues here to say hi. Becca, let's start with you.
And to make sure I was unmuted, you'd think after 7 months of Zoom life, I'd be better at that. But hi, everyone. My name is Becca Larson. I'm the Regional Director of Admissions for the West Coast for Muhlenberg College. We're a small liberal arts college located in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Megan, you want to go?
Thanks, Melanie. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Rhodes, and I'm an Associate Director of Admission and Coordinator of International Admission at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Awesome. Barbara, welcome. Please say hi.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Melanie, and everybody else for giving us this opportunity. And we can't see your faces, students, but it's still really nice to do our best seeing you in our mind's eye. I am an associate director at Williams College in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. We're a small liberal arts college. I hope someday you'll be able to come visit.
Yes. Dave Wagner, please say hi.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Wagner, Director of Admissions at St. Olaf College, which is about 45 minutes south of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Thanks so much for having us.
That is not a virtual background Dave has. That is his family's cabin in northern Wisconsin, and we all wish we were doing this session there. So thank you, Dave. Okay, by way of kicking this off, I feel like a conversation that our team has a lot and that we have with our counterparts in Seattle and around the country is whether the stress that everyone is feeling right now is COVID-19 stress, especially if you're a 12th grade family, or if this is the kind of stress that 12th graders always have during the senior fall, right? We all have done this for many years. It is a stressful time. Some stress can be good stress, but it's been interesting to distinguish what is sort of natural 12th grade stress from pandemic stress. And so I think a shared goal of ours today is to put a lot of things in context that give you real information, but also help sort of dial down the tension maybe just a little bit and put people more at ease. I think one thing that can do that, and I know from my admission background, is that colleges really try hard to evaluate students in context. So would a few of you speak to how you read students in context, and also how in particular you use the information you get from high schools to understand what students are going through right now? Barbara, you want to start?
Sure, thanks. You know, we all have to acknowledge what a strange year this is. It's challenging for everybody. And I think the stress that students are feeling is very real. And I think all of us in the admission world and I'm sure in most areas that, are feeling that too, and really trying to do everything we can to work with students and relieve that stress while acknowledging that it's real. So sure, I think there's so many things that for a student right now feels unpredictable. So this is a year with more unpredictable, than usual. It's always a bit like, you try to pick, you're a high school senior, you're doing this great work, you're working on your applications, and you're trying to picture yourself in a year. Where am I going to be? That's already like, that's hard. It's exciting. It's exciting, I hope, but it can cause a little stress as well. And this year it's all the harder. So we feel for you. And I think we're all working really hard to create the, most, I don't know, to work with you as best we can. But in terms of your question, so yeah, your context is so important to all of us. We get far more applications from students that have, perfect transcripts or have done incredible research than we can admit. We don't just admit based on we don't put you all into some sort of algorithm and spit out what is, quote, the best. That's not what college is about. So we're creating a community here at Williams. I think my colleagues would say something similar in their own ways. So it's very important to us that we see you in your context. How have you been a member of your community? And then your communities are so different, right? So it becomes a really important part of our job to understand your context, to understand where you're taking classes, what your family looks like, what your neighborhood, your worldview. So it's really our job to understand your complete lived experience, I think. And I think students should hopefully rest assured, especially some of the students that are here today from the schools that are represented, you have counselors who are really working to create for counselors a great picture of your context. So when they send your transcript to us, we're getting a really nice overview of your school, the school profile. We're usually also getting a really specific note from your counselor that speaks to both you and your context and the general context so that we can understand. All of us here on the panel today, I think, are here because Seattle, Washington is an area that we represent. So then there's that layer too. It's our job to understand where you live, what it's like there, what your schools are like. Occasionally, if we don't feel like we understand it from your counselor and from your application, we reach out. When we reach out, it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. We want to know more about you and your context. So it's very important to us. And I guess there's so many different elements in that, but why don't I leave it at that? Because someone else might want to join in and take it a bit further.
That's great. I love that point too, that everyone on this meeting represents Seattle, reads applications for Seattle, right? So there's a dedicated person who understands each school deeply and feels a responsibility to do that. Megan, will you speak to additional information that is being assessed under COVID, and then maybe Becca swoop on in with anything that you'd like to add at that point?
Sounds good. I think, like Bara was saying, of course, trying to understand meeting students where you are right now is so important. And I can definitely understand with how things are being portrayed in the media about admission. It's really intimidating. It's really frightening. And I think one thing that was really great a few weeks ago was our director was actually in an interview with Wall Street Journal, and he said, the thing is, with COVID and everything that's happening, if you need to be in your basement, eating Captain Crunch, watching movies, playing computer games, that's your extracurricular activities this year. Us too. We're right there with you, and that's okay. And not only is it okay, but it's necessary self-care to get through these times that we're in right now. So I think to that point, I do hope that helps sort of dismantle a little bit of like the concern and the stress, and that is in some major publications that I've been reading. It's like, oh, what's going to happen next year? And the thing is that we really, like, the people behind the process are really trying to just get through this with you in ways. So we want to support you as much as we can. And we're taking all of that into account in terms of how we're going to be evaluating applications this year. You're going to have a transition to online learning, right? Online learning, very different, very difficult transition for a lot of people for many understandable reasons. So we need to take that into account too. When we are reading your transcript, we are looking at your grades, we need to take that into our process as well. Say, okay, well, you know, this was a really unprecedented, uncharted time. We have to put that into our perspective when we're looking at your grades and at your transcript this year.
Becca, you want to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I love what Megan's director said. I think that is so important that in a lot of conversations I've had with students, it feels like there's this pressure, you know, if their varsity sport couldn't happen, or, you know, the camp that they were planning to be a counselor at was canceled. And all of a sudden it feels like there's a lot of pressure to supplement what was canceled or what isn't happening with new things. But for some students, there isn't that ability. And for some, it just doesn't feel possible, right? There's just so much, you know, kind of invisible weight on all of our shoulders right now. And so I think not feeling like you have to pick up all of these new things or gain all of these new hobbies, although certainly, you know, I've heard from lots of students about how they taught themselves ukulele by watching YouTube videos, or they are very into sourdough bread baking now, you know, and so those hobbies or those new things that you've been able to take advantage of because you hadn't had time for them before, that's important context for us as well, right? So maybe it's not the varsity season that you were hoping for, but you're still growing and learning as a human being. And so to be able to share that either in an interview, you know, in conversation with admission representatives, you know, those are all really important factors. And know that, you know, I think Barbara touched on this a little bit, but your counselors are a great advocate, and that they'll help contextualize what's going on at your school, right? Did the school go, you know, were your classes pass fail, you know, for the spring semester? Is there anything that we should be looking out for on a transcript, classes that shifted or anything like that, so that when we're evaluating you, we really understand the whole story? I often say to students, you know, we don't know what we don't know in the admission process. And so it's important for you to provide that context. But I think this year, it feels like there's so much explaining to do. So know that you don't have to carry that weight completely by yourself. Your counselors and your teachers are going to provide some really important context as well. So make sure you're partnering with them to make sure that all of that information is clear and represented somewhere on your application.
That's great. And I know I speak for all of the participant high schools that we each have a statement that talks about our unique school circumstances, that describes limited testing in Seattle. You know, we'll be able to put all of those things in context for folks who are reading from all over the country and, you know, and feeling their very local experiences, but need to know this was the testing situation in Washington State, for example. I'm going to now turn it over to Dave. Something that I have suspicions about, but I'd love to hear from you about is, you know, rethinking how your team is planning to read applications. Because having been in your shoes, you know, some time ago, we talked very deliberately as a staff about how to norm and train application reading. And a question has already come in about the absence of test scores, which I think we'll get to in just a moment. But you're all having to think about how to frame that committee process differently. Dave, will you talk about how you're starting to think about it at St. Olaf, and then maybe a couple other people pick up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really thoughtful question. And I'm a firm believer that I think with great disruption comes really great opportunity for innovation and thinking about things differently. And when I look back to how quickly we moved in the spring to get our whole campus visit program up online, we developed a really cool like contactless driving tour with like an audio guide. It's kind of like Disney, but like without the monorail and maybe like without the theme music, but like we did that pretty snappy, you know? And I think about how colleges and universities changed the way in which we're trying to show up in front of prospective students and parents this fall. And if I put on my positive lens, I think that there's some real positives coming out of the impact of COVID. And one of those, candidly, is I think all of the research that I have seen suggests that the best predictor of how students are going to do in college or university is their high school GPA. And a lot of our internal research suggested that as well. So even pre-COVID, we were planning on moving to becoming test optional because we felt like we wanted to rethink how we were reading to really focus on the work in the context of students' high schools that they're doing in high school as the biggest indicator of how they're going to come and perform at St. Olaf. So I think students and parents, I think that COVID is shifting the conversation about how college reps will be reading applications in a really, really thoughtful way. As Barbara said, you are more than numbers, you are human beings. And it's our goal to have a process that honors that, both in the reading process, but also in a decision-making framework or rubric. So Melanie, to answer your question, we're still in big conversation at St. Olaf, and I'm not entirely sure what committee will look like. I'm pretty sure that I'm not game for like 12 hours of Zoom meeting in a row. So what we're doing is putting together small working teams on my team to really think about, well, how are we reviewing? Are we going to review by territory? Are we going to split things up differently than we have in the past? We have not done partner-based reading in the past, but we're thinking about that as a potential way of both building connection and sustained connection with team members instead of reading independently this year. So at the moment, everything is kind of up for conversation, and our early decision and early action deadline is November 15th. So we're meeting twice a week between then and now to kind of finalize our process. So I don't have a lot of specifics, but I'm excited because I think the conversation is going to be like, let's look at this totally differently. Let's make sure that we are honoring students fully for who they are and encourage them to show up as their authentic selves in their apps and in our application pool, and let us think about how to make really thoughtful decisions. So it's kind of a big picture answer, but I'm approaching things with a real lens of excitement, and I have a great team and they're bringing some really great ideas to the table.
Yeah, I do not doubt it. Will others speak to, Barbara, I wanted in particular for you to talk as part of your answer maybe about, being a place that required testing forever, right? We have other test optional schools today. And so there is that consideration of we're accustomed to seeing testing. How do we read now?
I guess we're all having to, don those optimists hat a little bit, and it is actually exciting. I mean, we all do this work because we're passionate about it. That's really why we're here. As much as we're making the really big bucks. Short, it's a work of love, right? So it's challenging, but that's what makes it interesting. And yes, Williams has been a school that required testing up until a few months ago, where we went test optional. So it's a great project. And as Dave said, I mean, the studies show that this might be for the best anyway. And I think to put it in context, so I mean, there are a few different things I guess I want to share. The first is that we've already done a round of reading of applications for our fly-in program. So some of you out there know what a fly-in program is. That's great. I mean, that's practice. We got 1,000 of those to read already. And from 1,000, we were able to, bring to campus, as it were, over 200. So we already did a pretty, stiff selection process, and it worked really well for us. We had to relook at everything. We had to change up our charts and our thinking, and we're really capable of it. The other thing I think that students should understand is that we're really used to looking at very different applications from different students, right? And from different schools. So some schools have an IB program. Some schools have an AP program. Some have none of that. Some students are taking college classes or dual enrollment. Some are doing early college. I mean, there's just so many differences that we're used to looking at when we make our decisions. So testing and not testing is really just one more. It's not like this new, crazy situation that we find ourselves in. So it's not as hard as it might seem. So I think that's another thing. And then I guess the one other thing I wanted to add, building on what Dave just said, because some students might not know this, we all do things a little differently, but one way or another, at every school represented here, we read every application. and we read every single thing that is sent. We don't ask anything just to, for a hoop for you to jump through. And we can do that. We're smaller schools, and that's how we want to do it, the holistic read and all of that. So we actually are looking at every single part, meaning that if there's one thing that's left out this year, if you don't send us our testing, we still have everything else to work with. So again, it's not this startlingly, unusual situation for us. And then the other thing I wanted students to make sure they understood is, one way or another, the way it works, I think, at all of our colleges is, first, an admission officer reads the application, and then there's some sort of panel later. So nobody's just getting sort of one shot, or, if someone wasn't in a good mood when they read your application or something, it's not random like that. At Williams, we do the paired reading that was being referred to. So 2 of us are going to look at every application, and then there's our panel of 11 that look at every. So some variation of that is going on at all of our schools.
Becca or Megan, would you like to add anything about how your teams are thinking about assessment at this point? And it could be both of you. Anything you want to say?
Sure. Well, Melanie probably knows this because we've known each other for almost 10 years now, but I actually didn't wear glasses before I started working in admissions. And after, over 10 years of reading applications, now I have this fun accessory that I actually really love on my face. But, I think that really speaks to, what Barbara was saying about how we read each and every application from cover to cover. And I think this year, we're all anticipating that the reading process might take a little bit longer, just because, we have an additional COVID statement. We're, kind of reframing how we're looking at transcripts. If, that we see pass-fail grades, if we see changes to, a student's curricular choices, maybe we don't have midterm, senior grades as early because school year started a little bit later as they transition to virtual learning. So I think we're all kind of prepared to go into this knowing that we might have a few more questions going into reading each and every application. And that's why I think that committee process is so important, right? Is because it's really the first reader's job to, kind of take those notes, provide that context, make recommendations. And then when you get into a group, as a, staff or as into smaller committees, that's when you can really start to kind of dive into those conversations and ask those questions. But, I know we're spending a lot of time on screens right now. Most of us read digitally now as well, but I think we're all kind of prepared to dive in, knowing that there's going to be some more kind of holes to fill in as we're evaluating applications this year.
Perfect. And your accessories are always on point. So thank you. Megan, I have a specific question for you that addresses a question in the Q&A, but I think bridges this question and a Q&A question, which is about the SAT and ACT. Colorado College is both highly selective and test optional. And I think sometimes families have that question of at what point would we know to send a score if we had a score, right? So will you kind of describe when a score is actually additive and maybe give families a little bit of a guide, your line about when to send or not to send?
Thank you. Yeah, I know it can be a little bit confusing trying to negotiate that space. So for CEC in particular, we went test optional last year, and we went test optional in September. So most students had already taken the test or had plans to take the test. So I think that was kind of part of our transition into the non-testing universe, is that we had probably about a third of our students that were admitted to CC still had submit scores out of last year's class, just for some context there. And then, in terms of this year, now that we're where we are in the world, I think what is good to know is that, with scores, with schools that are test optional, they will often post on their admission website what scores, what the median range is of the students that are submitting their scores. So you can get a sense for what that looks like and like where you might fit within that range. So if you're trying to decide like, well, what does this mean at Colorado College or Williams or Muhlenberg and so forth? So you kind of get that institutional context from the school about what that looks like. I think, it's hard because in our first year, we would say, if you're trying to decide whether or not to submit your scores, if you feel like your scores represent your skills and abilities as a student and your potential, then we encourage you to submit them. But if you don't think they represent your abilities and potential as a student, you don't have to. And I think it also helps to have that median context on top of that, because that can mean different things at different schools, what your skills feel like are how they're represented in those scores, and what the context of the scores that the school does receive. So I hope that can be helpful to try and get a sense of that. I think this year, of course, if we can just add that we want you to be healthy and we want you to be safe. And so, of course, now there's this added dimension of risk to take a test. And so please know that nobody wants that for you. Nobody wants you to jeopardize, risk your health, fly places that are offering tests and all of that. So in this conversation, please know that your health and safety is the most important.
Thanks, Megan. And Kyle asks a related question that maybe I'll just touch on briefly. Kyle, you asked, if I don't send a score, aren't they just going to think that I didn't test as high, right? That I made that choice. And Matt Steiner said in their test prep session, which was in the first round of meetings, that it will not be distinguishable to colleges who could not test or who chose not to submit a score. And anybody tracking the news, which I know is everybody on this meeting, knows that especially on the West Coast, testing is much dearer, right? It's much harder to come by. So I think we don't want, and as Megan said, you don't want students to risk health, fly places to try to get a test when the vast majority of West Coast students are not going to have tests, or their tests, even if they could take a test, it was such a suboptimal experience because they were masked and in a small town that was not their town, right? That it's not even a representative score. Anyway, switching gears a little bit, someone specifically asked, so I'll kick this to Dave and Barbara, about athletic recruiting. And they asked about St. Olaf and Williams. I know this would apply to all 4 schools here, but Dave and Barbara, will you just talk about differences in athletic recruiting and athletic conversations this year?
Okay, I'll start. Well, honestly, there's not going to be a lot of difference this year. So the question talked about athletic and merit-based. So at Williams, we don't actually have merit-based. We meet need for every student. So we kind of look at like everybody's getting merit-based financially. So we don't have to worry about that. But when it comes to athletics, for the most part, Williams is a Division III school. Some of our winter sports are Div 1. But regardless, that means that our coaches aren't out there finding you. And then, of course, this year they wouldn't be anyway, I imagine. I don't think coaches can, they can't do anything that the rest of us can't. So what that does is it puts the onus on the student, which is actually kind of great. We encourage our students to reach out to coaches at any point in your career. If you are a freshman and you're sitting in on this panel, and you're like, yeah, I really want to play hockey for Williams. You can reach out to the hockey coach right now. Now, I can't promise they're going to write you back right away. But what I can say is remember that when you're reaching out, you're doing that for 2 reasons. You're doing that, to let the coach know you exist, right? There's that sort of form of competition that's out there. Can I get a little support from athletics? But you're also trying to find out if you like the culture of that team. So use it as an opportunity for you to say, what are your students? What do you like? What are your ethics? How do you run your programs? So as much as I just said, you can do that really early in your career, and you can. At a Div 3 school like Williams, you are not really going to start in an in-depth conversation of any type with a coach until the summer before your senior year. So you can get that going whenever you like, but be ready to respond to emails, even send a transcript early. The summer before, the spring and summer before your senior year at a school like Williams. But I don't honestly think it's a whole lot different. I know that you're probably worried about all those times that you would go, what do they call those, when you go in an exhibition?
A showcase, maybe.
Okay, you can see, you got really the right person answering this question from Williams. They would laugh, and my fellow admission officers, that Barbara got an athletics question. But all the same, I can do this. The showcases, the the ways that our coaches sometimes see you, they're happening virtually. They're looking at people's videos, they're reaching out. You've got your history. So I don't think it's actually going to be that different this year than it has been in the past. And again, you can, send older videos and explain yourself. Just like Megan was saying, like, this is a different year. Explain why. I wasn't able to do this sport this year, but I love it. The coaches are really interested in your attitude and how you collaborate as well. It's not just the points you can earn.
Barbara, I think for a non-athlete, that was a home run, to use an athletic term. Good job. I would just add that I have been so pleasantly surprised. We have a really close working relationship with coaches at St. Olaf. How many coaches are actively recruiting? And again, as Barbara said, they're doing it using virtual means, but that's also the beauty of the world in which we live in, is that they can watch tape of you from previous years. They have their networks of coaches in other places that they know. So I actually just had a great conversation with a softball recruit from the east side, outside of Seattle, last week. And she has been in great contact with the coach. So I would just echo everything that Barbara said. I think students, this is an opportunity for you to also self-initiate and to continue building relationship. And remember, this is all so relational, and that there are people there to support you. So even if it looks and feels different than it would in a normal year, just remember, it's really just the vehicle that's different. All the people and the players are the same.
Awesome. We're going to go back to questions that are in the Q&A, but Becca, I have a question for you. I feel like the question we all get a lot, both college folks, high school folks, is to what extent deferrals from the class of 2020 will impact this applicant pool. And some call it the deferral crisis that isn't, because it may not have much impact. Some are scared that it will be the most challenging admission year ever. Will you just give us the straight scoop on that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And, I think one thing I always like to point out is that a deferral is never a guarantee when a student requests it, right? So it's, it's an ask that they, request on, to the dean of admission generally, and sometimes it's approved and sometimes it isn't, right? So I think that when we were approving deferrals this year, it was, we were in deep conversations with each of those students. And, anecdotally at Muhlenberg, we didn't see a significant increase in deferral requests. I think, it got to a point where students were like, well, what else would I be doing right now? Because, I would just be at home. So I might as well continue my academic journey in some capacity. And I think ultimately, I think there is this fear. That was the conversation that started back in April, right? When, a lot of colleges extended their deposit deadline to give students a little bit more time. But I think what people don't often think about is that if a college did, if a larger number of students deferred, it may mean that college fell short within their enrollment goal for, the class of 2024, the incoming first-year students or the current first-year students. So that actually means that they're looking to kind of make that up in future years. So I can't speak to, it's going to look different at every single institution. And I know that there's, every time I turn on the news or open up the Chronicle of Higher Education, I think you see that number from Harvard, which, is a pretty significant number, but you're not hearing that, kind of far and wide across all institutions, and again, I can't speak to every college or university, but I think it's something that there's already so much stress within this process. I don't think it is worth additional energy or worry or fear. And certainly, if you really want to know for the colleges that are on your list, when you're having conversations during those high school visits, during your interview, you can ask that question, because colleges will generally be transparent with you. But ultimately, I really think, don't overly stress about it. There's too much else to juggle in this process. I don't want that to be, something else that's keeping you up at night as it relates to the college process. And I don't know if anyone else, I saw nodding heads, but I don't know if anyone else has something to add.
Yeah, any additions or another favorite way, it was perfect, by the way, of answering the deferral question. Anybody want to jump on?
Becca, I thought that was really, really well said. I feel like when I've been working with students and families this year, I try to really gently remind them, like, there are so many things that you can't control in this process and so many things beyond your control. And I feel like the deferral situation is going to be completely different at every school. And I think for some schools, it might make things a little more selective. For other schools, some schools intentionally sort of under-enrolled for social distancing or like to have a safe environment on campus. So it is an important question, but I think to sort of zoom out, and students, I think the more you can focus on the things that you can control, and that is like how you are showing up and how you are engaging, even if it is via Zoom day in and day out. I think that's what I've really been trying to encourage students and parents to think about throughout this fall is focus on what you can control. And I think I need to hear that too. So that's probably why I just keep saying it, is because I need to hear that too.
Great
I would
reminder.
emphasize, on that best, I don't think any of us can really say what next year is going to look like. So this is why we're all concentrating on what we can do, what we do know. We don't know. We're working with you, but we don't know.
That does speak, I think, Barbara, to a question that came in the Q&A, and you might be acknowledging it, which is one person asked, we realize this panel is dedicated to the senior class, but for 11th grade parents who are here listening, and I know you are here, of course, they're watching what's happening right now and trying to read the tea leaves for what would happen in the future. So the question really is, how soon do you think you're actually going to know what it's going to be like for the class of 2022, which again, may not be until this cycle is really concluded for you all, but does someone want to add anything to that? Like thinking ahead a couple years out?
One thing that's been interesting for me in this process is I'll, have students ask me questions about, something like study abroad, where right now we barely are thinking about leaving our homes, let alone our states, let alone the country. And I don't want to not talk about it, right? Because it's something that's really important to students. It's something that was super transformative for me in my undergraduate experience. But it feels like this kind of like taboo thing where it's like, well, we can talk about it, but it's kind of hypothetical, right? And so I think, as it relates to, the juniors that are in this space today, I think, what Melanie said and kind of seeing how the next year plays out, but certainly, questions we're asking ourselves within the reading process, right? Of, how are we going to factor pass fail into our reading process? We know that that's not something that's just impacting the current seniors, right? There's 3 other classes of high school students for whom, that we're going to see that on transcripts for the next couple of years. So, so we know that this has impacted our juniors just as much as it has the seniors. And while I know that the focus right now is on the seniors who are navigating this process, we're asking ourselves those questions. But I think we're what's the phrase, like building the ship as you sail it or what have you. That's probably wrong, but you understand what I'm saying in that we're working, to I hate using the word pivot because it's just an overused word in the landscape of 2020, but I think we're doing everything we can to ensure that we're supporting our seniors, knowing that some of the processes that we're implementing will be used for future years as well. But one thing that is somewhat related that I wanted to touch on is I think for students navigating the process right now, there's almost way more information out there than there ever was in terms of, there's the high school visit, but there's also, 45 different webinars either, hosted by, and they're great. I'm very happy to be here today, but, it's a lot, right? And so I think it's that like paradox of choice of, there's so much, how do you choose what to do and how do you strike that balance? And I think that is we're going to see that for years, because we're asking ourselves in the office, like, well, even once, we can open our campus to visitors and have those open house programs, I don't think we're going to get rid of all these virtual programs, because, the reach that we can have for students applying from further away is spectacular. So we've built this cool infrastructure. Now I'm just rambling, but I think there's a lot, that we're thinking about. So know that we haven't forgotten about you, high school juniors. We're here to support you. And we know that, this has impacted you just as much, and it will continue to impact, elements of the admission process moving forward.
I also have a thought of that is a very college counselor centric answer. But before I give it, I want to kind of prepare the panel for a question I'm going to ask all of you, which is, what is a question that you wish families asked you more often, perhaps with the answer to that question? And then while you're thinking, right, I will add that I feel like we hear from families, well, there's no way to know what the future will be. So why don't we just Hail Mary this one school, or, it's all a big mystery anyway. How can you possibly know? We should just give it a shot. And I will say on behalf of college counselors, all of whom in Seattle are very skilled at pattern recognition and acknowledging that there are actually a lot of knowns still in college admissions. So my pitch for taking to heart the really good advice from your college counseling team at all the high schools that are represented today is to listen to their expertise, because they might be telling you sometimes things that you don't want to hear, but it is rooted in years and years of experience and recognizing patterns that did not completely fly out the window. Very hard colleges are still very hard colleges. It's not like suddenly everything became available to everyone, and we all track those patterns really carefully. So college counselor centric pitch for me. And then while you're giving your last thoughts to this question, in the chat, someone asked, I know you're all small schools, so how would a place like University of Washington manage 50,000 applications? And we all know that you scale up for the size of your office. So University of Washington would have much bigger teams than the colleges represented here. Part of why they have one deadline and tend to issue decisions at one time, in March usually, is because they've structured a process that works for them and can get those decisions out. It's also why you create a transcript for UW so that they're reading apples to apples when they read applications. They're not having to switch gears and interpret lots and lots of different transcripts, while they're reading. So you'll notice things about that application that are built to make it a thorough but efficient process for them. Okay, so first I'm going to go to Barbara. Barbara, what's a question you wish people asked more often? And then maybe answer it.
Things I wish people asked in their admission process, just any point as they're looking at Williams or thinking about college.
I think it would be so helpful if people would just ask it.
Well, I'm going to have two answers because neither are going to be perfect. How's that? And one is, Williams specific. I wish more people asked about financial aid earlier on, because I think that at small schools like ours, and then specifically Williams, the price tag is very high. There's no question for a private small school. You get a lot out of it, but it costs a lot. But what I think a lot of families don't understand, for lots of good reasons, is it might, at the end of the day, be more affordable even to go to Williams than the UW, because of our financial aid program. So don't be discouraged. Look into financial aid and know that we really meet you. Schools that meet need, that means we cover all expenses for some students. So I know that a lot of people just never even come our way. So that's not a question, but that's a something. That's kind of, yeah.
Awesome. Can we just do one? Just for time, just because I'm a very good clock watcher. Is that okay, Barbara? Okay. Megan, go.
Thank you. I think one thing that I wish that folks would take advantage of more is connecting with a current student on campus. So asking, are there opportunities for me to connect with a CC student? And how do I go about that? So I think especially not being able to visit is so difficult right now for you to get that feel of a place. And I think being able to have that one-on-one conversation with a current student is so valuable to get all of that feeling of the campus and get personal questions and values addressed in a really informal, comfortable setting. And the students are the real deal, right? So I think being able to have that kind of honest conversation is really helpful. And I would encourage more students to do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. Becca.
Everyone's giving such good answers. It's hard to beat. My favorite question a student ever asked me was, if I had to sort Muhlenberg into a Hogwarts house, what Hogwarts house would it be? Because I think if you're a Harry Potter person, that's a really good indicator of, kind of where you're supposed to be. But beyond that, I think just piggybacking off of what Megan said in terms of the student experience, I think this year in particular, with the inability to do, those student overnights, it's not to say that we can't offer incredible information as admission officers. It's our job to know the ins and outs of our college. But I think especially when it gets down to making that decision and really getting that sense of, is this the place for me? I think connecting not only with a current student, but maybe a current student from your hometown or from, who's made the trek, whether it's, 10 minutes from home or all the way across the country. I think to ask those questions about, change in seasons and flights and things like that is really, really important in this process. So, connect with students as much as you can.
Yes, use your humans. Dave, will you bring it home?
I'll talk real fast. It's not a specific question, but sometimes I wish that there was a focus shift. I felt like after 2008, everybody was all about like jobs. What am I going to do when I graduate? How is this useful? I feel like there's always a lot of questions on the front end, like how do I get in? How do I get scholarships? How do I get financial aid? Not that these are not important, but like what really happens in the 4 years? How will you be pushed? How will you be challenged? How will you be supported? Who are you surrounding yourself with? Think about like not only what do you want to do in your life, think about who you want to be, think about how you define community, think about this search as a reflection of your values. Go get them.
Yes, Julie, I know you're here. And on that note, I just want to acknowledge we're all having so much time to reflect right now. Please use it, right? You bring it to this process in a way that makes not only applying to college, but going to college a more healthy, fruitful, valuable experience for all of you. I know everyone who is present today would welcome general questions too about anything we talked about. So please reach out to these amazing humans who really do humanize the process and I think bring the blood pressure down for all of us. So thank you. And thanks to you, Julie, for helping us out today.
And thanks to all of you. Have a good afternoon.